everybody. We have hosted this podcast since early 2021, and we've tried to inform and entertain, and we've been mostly successful. But we're trying to answer the question, what podcasts have we enjoyed? What podcasts have taught us a thing or two? And have we just sat back and just got much out of? So today, that's what we're talking about. Jacob, let's start with you. Tell me the podcast and what is it about it that you enjoy?
Yeah, I'm a big Rick Beato follower. I subscribe to his podcast. He does so many different types of podcasts. Sometimes he'll do like, why is this song so great? Or sometimes he'll focus on like, hey, the 10 best intros in a music piece, right? Or he'll maybe sometimes have a guest on. He's been doing that a lot lately. He's had Sting and so forth, and those are fun. I love the one with May from Queen, and that was fun because they talked about guitar, like riffs and style, and I'm like, some of that, Ruben, I don't understand, but it's still fun because they're getting into it, they're excited about it. And so I like it because he's bringing in new information. He's such a good teacher, and he actually has episodes where you could pay into it and learn from him. And so what's so cool is that other people like Sting and others, they watch him. They go, oh yeah, we watch you, and he gets a big kick out of that, like, oh, you guys, wow, okay, these are people that I respect. And so he just recently had an episode, Ruben, on the Carpenters. Oh my gosh, he went through almost every hit, and he was a little afraid. So I'm not sure if this is going to get taken down, because sometimes he's been known where they've taken down some of his episodes because the bands don't really want their music out there, or they want to get paid, right? And so he had the Carpenters, and they went through every song, not every song, but the hits, and then he would stop and he goes, wow, did you hear that? Maybe they're focusing on the lyrics, or then he would say, oh, you know what, in this piece, it's for sure the Wrecking Crew, and of course the Carpenter, I can't remember the brother's name right now, but oh yeah, he played here, and he definitely was directing, but this is definitely the Wrecking Crew. Or then he would focus on his sisters, on Karen Carpenter's vocals, which is like the best, right? I'm sorry, you wanted to say something on that?
I just want us to just to pause for a moment so that our audience understood what you said. You
Sure.
like the podcast of Rick Beato, and that's
Rick.
Beato, just so that it's clear to them. And he hosts a music channel on YouTube. So we want to make that clear, because people might not.
And I want you guys to, and I want them to, the public to watch it, because it's such a great podcast.
Right. So he hosts this channel. He has hundreds of videos on music specifically. His specialty is guitar, but he also talks about drums, and talk about the top 20 intros to rock songs, through top 20 guitar solos, top 20 drum solos. And you said recently he had a discussion on the Carpenters, maybe 3 or 4 of their top hits.
Yeah, and that's pretty much it, Ruben.
What is it? What is it about that? Let's say that particular episode, though, that you like?
Well, like I was sharing that I didn't know he was going to be playing. Like, he did 4 or 5 songs, and I like that he was able to stop it at a certain point and be able to explain what's happening in the song. And you just see it in his face. He's like so excited. He's like, "Did you just hear where she went at range?" And or then he would say, God, look at the intro to this piece. So what I liked was that he's able to stop when he wants to stop and explain every part of it. Usually when we listen to a piece of music, we just listen to a piece of music, but he really gets you to appreciate all the different nuances that song has. And I don't think I could listen to the Carpenters the same, because I thought, oh yeah, they're great, but then I was so surprised that he was just blown away, because he likes a lot of rock, and he likes a lot of types of music. I never thought the Carpenters would be one of the groups that he would spend time with, but he got a big kick out of it, and because he was excited about it, I was excited about it, and so I think that's what I really got out of
it. So he has a wide range of musical interests. People can be surprised because he has videos on, like you mentioned, the Police, Sting, Van Halen, Black Sabbath, and then all of a sudden he talks about the Carpenters. So you're right, and musicians love him because he gets into details very specific details of chords and the chord changes, sus chords, and things that musicians love to talk about. But non-musicians like yourself and me like him because of, even though we might not understand all the lingo of the lexicon of musicians
Yeah.
that musicians have, you appreciate that passion. I also love Rick Beato, and I want to mention a particular episode. Now, I could have picked 20 of his, but there was an episode on the band Boston, More Than a Feeling, classic song that came out on March 22nd, 2018. And I'll just say this about this particular episode, but it's true it's true about a lot of his episodes, is like you said, the passion. So like a good teacher, Rick is a teacher, by the way, one of the best teachers. And you could see that in his videos. A lot of people comment, this is the best music teacher in the world. I wish I had this guy in college. A lot of musicians have commented, this guy, there's no one who teaches like him. But it starts with that passion. The other thing he has is competence. The man can play guitar. He shreds. So even in that particular video, he's really shredding. Actually, he has another video where he shreds in Hitch a Ride, a different Boston video, but he has integrity. So is that competence and the integrity is really coming out as a teacher. And it's very unusual when you have both passion, competence, integrity. He has it all. So I recommend people check out
For sure.
that. The episode you mentioned was recent on the Carpenters. The episode in More Than a Feeling came out a few years ago, but it's got millions of hits. Okay, Rick Beato is definitely a great podcast. What about something else?
There's a new podcast. I say new because I think it's in the last 6 months or so, called Fly on the Wall. It's with David Spade and Dana Carvey. And these are alums from Saturday Night Live. So they do a lot of Saturday Night Live guests. They bring them on and they just break down, the past and talk about, what it's like being an actor on that show and a character actor, right? And so they go through it, and they had several guests on that have been on that show, not only guest hosts but musicians and so forth. And recently they had River Cuomo, and so with that episode,
River Cuomo, the lead singer of Weezer.
Yeah, Weezer. And so what they did was they talked to him, and what I liked about it is that these guys always are jumping in on top of each other, and the reason why I like this show is not because they do that, because they even say we do everything wrong. We jump on top of each other, we talk over each other, sometimes it's all about us, and they'll even say that we're so neurotic, but Ruben, and I think you and I have talked about this before, it's the content of who they have on, and are you interested in it? And so the guests are great because you're interested in what they're talking about, and someone like River Cuomo talking about his past, about what he has had to go through as a musician and his history, and a lot of his history has to do with physical ailments, and he talked about one leg being shorter than another, and then him talking through that, and then of course the host listening and then sharing what they've also had to deal with physically and draining it, being a musician and a comedian, how difficult that is. And so so that being said, I think I enjoy that show particularly because these two guys are funny, right? Carvey and Spade, there's no one funnier, but also like I said, the guests they have are people that you're interested in, but also it's when they go deeper and they talk about issues that you and I go through, and it could be physical ailments, it could be anything like that, the loss of a parent and so forth. So
it's Fly on the Wall podcast hosted by David Spade and Dana Carvey.
Yes.
I was just talking about the issue of competence, and it's something that we take for granted. Of course, you have to be competent at your job, but I actually think as teachers, competence is very critical, and unfortunately, sometimes we forget about it. We forget that we have content to teach, and we have to know what we're talking about. So I mentioned that because Dana Carvey, if you look at some of his talk show interviews, when you go on YouTube, you can just watch him being interviewed by Conan O'Brien, and just different talk show hosts over the years.
Mhm.
And this guy is a comic. This guy is brilliant. He has he has these impersonations from the get. He can bring them, and he's just brilliant. So
Yeah, for sure.
good call. I want to mention in general, I think the Tim Ferriss podcast is
Mm.
fantastic. He is a kind of a startup founder, app builder, and an author. Was it the 5-day work? I don't know, 5-hour work week. I'm forgetting the title.
Yeah.
I just, it's a great book. But he's been hosting a podcast for a few years, maybe 7 or 8 years, and they're often excellent. And one thing I learned about Tim Ferriss is he has taught the skill of asking quality questions. And sometimes the phrasing of your questions will get more out of your guest. So he's excellent at that. And when you listen to his interviews, you'll start to hear it like, oh, his questions are a little bit better than a typical podcast host. Tim Ferriss in general. But there is one podcast in particular that I've listened to several times. And this is about maybe an hour, 90-minute discussion. And he has with a man named Naval Ravikant. And his last name is Ravikant. And this particular discussion was on October 29th, 2015, because he interviews Naval 2 or 3 times. But this particular one was just brilliant. I got so much out of this. There's so much to learn from Naval. I know Scott Adams has frequently said that Naval is the smartest man on the planet. And when you listen to this man, you understand why someone would say that. The brilliance, and just a few things before we move on, things that I've learned from him just from this podcast. He talks about reading with intelligence or reading with strategy, and saying that it's not a wise move to read every word in every book. Even though we might have been taught that, you have to read the whole book. He says, drop a book when you're done with it. The book is to serve you. The other thing he talks about is the meditation and the importance of just sitting still for 10 or 15 minutes doing nothing. And he says, if you can't do that, there's something wrong. And he talks about the importance of just sitting still. And that, I'm not trying to be woo-woo or kumbaya or anything like that, but the idea of our attention spans being impacted in this day and age with technology, and how if you can't sit quietly for 10 to 20 minutes doing nothing, there's something wrong. And then he can get into technology, and he talks about robots and fully humanized robots. Let me ask you something, Jake, before we do move on. Are we capable right now of creating fully humanized robots that can think like us and act like us?
What I understand is that we're pretty close if we're not there yet. I think we're almost there.
And Naval says we are not even close.
Really?
Yeah. And so what I like is that you have this idea of something, and he explains it. He says, no, we're not. The human brain is so complex. He says scientists are not even close to replicating what the human brain can do yet. It just isn't. And he explains that in the podcast. So let me move on. What about your last podcast? We're doing 3 each, I think.
Yeah, I think the last one, I mean, there's so many. I mean, we talk about Joe Rogan, but he's the big one, right? But I like Rob Lowe's Literally. And I think it's a phrase that he had in Parks and Recs, but it's not. He actually has another podcast for Parks and Recreation, a show that he was on. But this one's actually just called Literally, and he has different guests on. And what I like about him, Ruben, is so with the Fly on the Wall, it wasn't so much how they communicate with each other, because they kind of don't always do the right thing. Their content's great. But with Rob Lowe, it's the way he communicates. I think he's just very clear. He's very articulate. I know he's done some Dodger specials because he's a big Dodger fan. And so they have had him on because he's just a great communicator. And so because of that, I've enjoyed his podcast when he's had guests on. And even when he's had people like Lily Collins, the daughter of Genesis, Phil Collins. I'm waiting for him to talk about Genesis and talk about Phil Collins. No way, he's respecting her, and he never brings him up. He never brings up Genesis. And I go, wow. I think sometimes he'll even say, I think you guys are thinking I'm going to talk about this, but no, everyone talks about that. Let's talk about something about what Lily's done and her new show. I think it's called Emily in Paris, right? And so let's talk about what she's accomplished, and then they just go off and they talk about. And of course, he's going to have a lot more movie stars and so forth, because that's where the world he comes from. Okay. And so, but I think I foresee more sporting celebrities, because he is also loves sports. But that being said, Ruben, I'm drawn to that show more because of the way he talks to his guests and the way, and I'm always learning. I'm not as articulate as him or even as you, but I enjoy learning and getting better. And I think he's a good teacher in that way. For me, at least, I'm learning. I'm a student. So I throw that at you. Literally by Rob Lowe.
The Literally podcast with Rob Lowe. I want to mention real quickly because he tells a story. Rob Lowe tells a story of going to Santa Monica High School with Sean Penn, Robert Downey Jr., and Charlie Sheen. They were all classmates. And he said that he was Mr. Thespian. He was deeply involved in acting as a high school student. So he was in the drama club. He took drama classes. He was all in on that. And he said, actually, Sean Penn wasn't, or I don't remember what he said about Robert Downey, but Charlie Sheen wasn't. But he mentioned that he used to see Charlie Sheen drive up Santa Monica High School in a Porsche, and he'd walk out, and he said, passing by Charlie Sheen, it smelled like he had been dunked in a cologne vat for 10 minutes and brought it back out. And he said, Charlie Sheen, there you go. And then it wasn't until later that they became interested in acting. And they had kind of a leg up because I think they knew some people. Yeah. Sean Penn and Charlie Sheen, just a few people. So that was a cool story by Rob Lowe.
He has so many stories, Ruben. He's full of stories. That's why it's fun to watch or listen to. I'm sorry. How about you? What's your last one?
For the final one, I have a little curveball only because I love it so much. It's so good. It's not a podcast, but I just thought I would recommend it because I don't know any other time I'd have a chance to recommend it. And it has as much of an impact on me as the Rick Beato channel and as Tim Ferriss's channel. And that is the audiobook Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. It is fantastic. It is so good that upon finishing it, I was just disappointed. I just wanted it to keep going. And I was so hungering for something similar to it that I would read other books that were like it. But I don't think there's any other book that's quite
Great
like
book.
it.
I've read it. It's really good.
I would say that like any other biography, it tells a story. All biographies tell stories, and it tells a person's story, Steve Martin and his life. But it also teaches ideas. Like it teaches a very basic concept such as, what is a joke? Now, I know that sounds very basic. We all know what a joke is. But Steve Martin is very intelligent. After you listen to the book, you got to listen to it because, it's the way it's told.
Yeah.
Steve Martin reading it. So you got to hear him tell it. But it's so basic, the idea of what is a joke, but he explains it into its I don't know, its kernel. And so you realize this man is a genius. Steve Martin really is. And the other thing, like besides what is a joke, what it means to be funny, what is talent, you also kind of feel what it's like to be in a predicament and how to get out of it. He explains that. You kind of just infer it. But more importantly, or just as importantly as all that, it is incredibly funny. Mm-hmm. I mean, he will tell you his bits. He will just describe his bits and sometimes act out his bits from the 70s and 80s, and you're laughing. It is quintessential reading or listening. One of my all-time favorite books. Born Standing Up.
I think we got to do that. We got to do an episode on just great audiobooks, because not all audiobooks have the original or the writer to deliver it. And in this case, Steve Martin.
Well, most don't. Most
don't. Yeah.
Very good, everybody. Thank you for joining us. What is your favorite podcast? I know what you're going to say, Pod and Deliver. I'm just trying to, I don't know. We'll see you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.